right? It can mean a lot of different things. Yeah? Maktaba means library. You just add an M. And kitab is a book, right? Do you see what I mean? The kitab thing means something related to a book in Arabic. In Egyptian, similarly, Kemet, another root of 3 sounds, right? 3 consonant sounds, refers to something that is black in color. Yeah? So it can be used for different words relating to blackness via the Kemet sound. It doesn't mean they're the same thing. It just means they all have something in common. So when it is used for Kemet, the black land, it carries the classifier, and you identified it correctly. It is indeed a classifier, or as Egyptologists sometimes call it, a determinative, which shows that it's a place, right? You were showing me. You showed me the glyph. It's a place with crossroads that you're seeing from the sky. That says it's a location that is referring to the black land, the inundation, the Nile Valley. This one, you see, the classifier has changed. And so now it is cattle with horns. And it's referring to cattle that is black in color. Okay? So it's not the same word. Like I'm saying, everything that's sort of Kemet related, like this guy who calls himself Kemi, the black, in his nickname, right, his epithet, that's also black. It's a slightly different word. It's got the same root, so it means something that's connected. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Okay, let's finish. All right, let's finish.
Yeah,
Here we go. Here we go.
Bring it on. Bring it on.
Here we go. Here we go.
I love language. You can't stop me. I love it.
All right, here we go.
I need to see a few more people, please. Hook that up. We ain't. It's like we on recess. What you think this mean? If you don't think it mean what you mean what it look like it mean, write what you think this means on in the chat. I'm gonna give a second. Let's listen. All right. Somebody said black herd, black cattle. Yep. Now, the person who said black herd was taking into account that we got a plural strokes at the bottom.
Yeah, it's
in this instance, he's correct. That is not just one cattle. Cattle could be a plural word too. But this is simple. Now notice, the determinative is not modifying. Now, I want us to be clear. This is an adjective, but in this word, this is a noun.
Yes.
Kemet. What do I mean? You have to look at it like this. The ancient Egyptian who spoke this out his mouth didn't say anything but Kemet. Although he was referring to cattle in that instance.
Time out.
He did not have to.
Let's get some clarity on that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I can sort of clarify that a little, or not. Just because the Egyptians, when they write down their sounds, they only write the consonant sounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
We only see Kemet, but you can't say Kmt. None of us would speak that way. All languages introduce vowel sounds in between, like ke, met, right? So that it sounds okay for our ears. What we don't know is exactly how the Egyptians pronounced this word as distinct from Kemet, the Black Land. They may have used different vowels, right? One of the ways that we can tell if there is, if it's pronounced differently, one of the ways is to look at texts from the Christian era of Egypt, the Coptic period, in which they wrote out the words in Greek script. Now, in Greek script, of course, you have consonants, you have vowels, you can write everything out exactly as it sounds. But it's from a much later period, right? It's about 1,500 years after, like the Pharaonic period that I'm talking about. So it's not going to be exactly the same sounds, just like American English has changed a huge amount in 100 years, 200 years. 400 years, right? It's changed a lot in sound. So we can't say it's going to be exactly the same, but if we find different words with Kemet in them in Coptic, we can see that they were actually distinguishing words based on the vowel. So what I want to say is what he's saying, that it's the same word, it can't be verified because all we can see is the consonants.
Okay.
Right. So I'm not saying he's wrong because it's not verifiable. That's really the main thing.
Okay. All right. Let us move on.
Okay.
Go.
To say Kemet, Ka, unless of course the census mandate that you separate because you talk about something other black. But one thing we know is that black things can just take on the term Kemet.
They can.
So this cattle.
Did you want? Yeah. Anytime you want me to stop, I can stop. Okay.
Because we have this word kemem, like
Okay.
kemem also used as the color black. We also have the color.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
In the dictionary, this divine herd of black cattle is called Kemet. Now, we got a word and the category of the word.
How do we get divine out of that, though?
If you switch.
Oh, you want us to stop, Sosa?
Yeah. Oh, we got the good one coming too.
Yeah.
How do you get divine? How do you get the divine interpretation out of that glyph?
That's an excellent question, and I was wondering that myself, to be honest. So I don't know whether he's specifically talking about like whether he's taking it from a particular context. Well, there are. I mean, it could be. I mean, from what I can see, I don't know many cases in which they're talked about as being black cattle, because there are a lot of words for cattle in Egyptian, right? Heaps of them.
Like Kakem would be black cattle. Right?
There's Kem, yeah, right. You could say Kakem, exactly. Very well done, exactly. And there's another word. There's Ka, there's Ihu, or Ich, in the singular. So yeah, Nega. There are a couple of different words, that go in that direction of describing a cattle. In this particular one, where you have this black ones, this would be a sort of direct, translation of Kemet, or Kemut, actually, with the plural, might just be coming up in a religious context, because there are certain cattle that are regarded as incarnations of gods. Okay. For instance, the Apis bull or the Nevis bull, are seen as representations of gods in the world. So in that case, if you look in the corpus, I'm just having a quick look, and I can see that these are indeed seen as being children of a god. But your friend who made the video might know that, like, he might know the text that he's taking this from. This is always the problem with these instructions, is if you're just seeing it's one word out of context, it's very hard to know where exactly is the meaning coming from. So I would say, yes, I think we can find indications that talking about cattle as black ones can come from religious contexts and refer to them as divine cattle, but it doesn't come from the word itself. It comes from knowing what kinds of texts that word comes from, right? Okay. So it's not inherent. It's not inherent to the word itself.
Okay.
So he's right, but it's not inside the word.
Okay. All right, here we go.
Okay.
The category of the word, people going to tell you, they're going to throw their hands in the air and they're going to say hella grammar lies. As apparent as it is, they're not talking about cattle anymore. No matter what your brain is doing, I want to ask, what are they talking about now? Again, we'll go back to the cattle. And no one had a problem saying that this is talking about a herd of black cattle. The only thing that changes is the ideogram. The determinative is going to change to humans.
Stop.
Okay, all right.
Black didn't
Got you.
change.
Freeze. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So I would say here, yeah, this is absolutely a legitimate word, and what we're seeing, this is referring, like pursuant to my comment earlier, that we have this word for a black land, of being the Nile Valley, so it's actually a place name. When you have then a people added to a place, and that doesn't just go for this case as with Kemet, it goes for all place names. It refers to the people belonging to that place. So you can change the classifier. You can have a classifier that shows you a place, and you replace it with a people classifier, and it tells you inhabitants of that place. So this is absolutely a real word, and it is referring to Egyptians, people living in the Nile Valley, right? Because Kemet means Nile Valley.
Right. So you're saying because it's a place name, then the meaning, then the instructions of the classifier changes, because now you're dealing with a place name, so that changes. So that's what. Okay, that's what's being misunderstood. Okay.
Exactly. So I just feel like, so like I said, the reason I interpret it this way, there are two reasons why I'm interpreting this as people living inside the Nile Valley. Firstly, we have other documented cases in which you have a place name and then you change the place classifier with a people classifier, and it refers to inhabitants of that place. So we have precedent there that that's the case. And the second is, as I mentioned in our conversation earlier, we don't have any documentation that the Egyptians themselves differentiated peoples according to skin color. None whatsoever. So the idea that this would represent people with black colored skin, like Kemet for the cattle refers to cattle with black colored hide, which is the analogy that he's drawing, I would just say it doesn't have precedent, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I can say as an Egyptologist. Just knowing the language and knowing what else we have in the language.
That's interesting. Could you go with a little more? Okay, we talked about it earlier, how they didn't call like the Nubians. They didn't refer to it. Could you go back over that a little bit?
That's right. So we have people of various shades of skin color living in Egypt in antiquity and today, and that's because Egypt is an African country, and it stretches from the Middle East into the Sudan, right?
Fact.
It always has, and it does now. In fact, and that's an interesting thing about the word Egypt. Sometimes people say, oh, you shouldn't be referring to it in the ancient sense as Egypt because it wasn't called Egypt then. It's like, that's fair, but the land mass itself hasn't changed spectacularly since antiquity. Okay, so this was a space in which stretches literally from the Middle East to Africa, right into Africa, and therefore also has a population that reflects that plurality of cultures. It always has, and it does now. So there are a lot of incredible Egyptians that I meet when I'm on digs in Egypt, in southern Egypt, and they proudly refer to themselves as Nubian. They are people with black-colored skin who are very proud to identify as Nubians. Nubians are an ethnic group that's always been living in Egypt and between Egypt and the Sudan, of a darker-colored skin. So you have an Egypt that has always looked this way. Why would Egyptians distinguish skin color when the plurality of skin color is normal to them? Why? They don't. Right? That's what so you were talking yourself about the idea that, we have shoehorned an idea of race onto antiquity, and I absolutely agree with you. We are enforcing ideas that are really problematic, and really couched in a very, judgment-filled 19th century, let's put everyone into categories kind of ideology. And it's really unfair to ascribe that kind of thinking to an ancient people without any evidence for it.
No, see, I say, yes, I say that all the time. And my thinking is that it was actually it was that early racism in the Egyptology that kind of followed suit with that, and
Oh.
they actually enslaved Africans. Hitler actually murdered the Jews, all based off of these racial pseudoscientific categories. And I always say that it is out of order to place that back on indigenous people that had not came up against that type of ideology yet. And man, that's a good explanation. That's
Can I ask a question too? Like, so another problem is like when they see, okay, like there was a wife of a pharaoh named Kim Set, and where they see these names Kim Set in these names, they think that every time you see Kim, it's a reference to skin color. If a person has a name like Kenny Pepe Anhk Kim, they
Pepe
think
Anhk
like, yeah. So it could, what could it also be related to, like the title, or maybe the job, or is it like, is there other instances where you see it where we can demonstrate that?
It's interesting with Pepe Anhk. I mean, it's really just hard to know why he had this title, like Kem or Kemi. You know, what was it referring to? Did he have particularly black hair? Like, is it a blackish attribute in his person? Is it his character? Is it a color? It's a very hard. Like a lot of nicknames, it's often really hard to know. It's what I've done some work on color terminology in Egyptian. I'm trying to write an article at the moment, and it includes the color Kemet, which is black, because I've been trying to find out whether it also has metaphorical meaning, like whether it means kind of dark, in an aggressive way or in a negative way.
Right.
And what's really interesting is we don't have that much of that either. So the Egyptians didn't habitually associate darkness with badness,
Benevolence, right.
And so we don't even have that. Like, so we can't even say that Pepe Anhk was kind of a bad character. That would be completely missing the point of what the language is actually telling us. Maybe it was because he was fertile, because the idea of the black land is that it's a fertile land. What I'm trying to say to you is word associations are very culturally inherent, and we can't necessarily trace all of those things. So I'm sorry I have to come up with no clear answer on it, but I think we just have to keep coming back to this is its own sovereign culture. It's got its own incredible language with a degree of meaning that we can trace, and I think we have to respect what there is, what we can see.
Respect the culture. Don't become colonizers and put our ideas on them and make it. Okay.
Please. I mean, of course, we all come with our own little set of lines in our heads. Yeah, as scholars, we are looking at the language with our own lens. We can't take that off necessarily, but that's why it's important to step slowly.
So as Americans, we can't phantom a world without associating color to human being. We can't phantom that. That's unfathomable for us. Like, what do you mean? We use it every day.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. And that's what makes it so sad, right? That then a culture has suffered so much under this paradigm that now they see it everywhere.
Okay, so as an Egyptologist, y'all actually try to take that out and look at the culture for what it is based off of the evidence that you find and work through your cultural biases. Is that basically what the field is today? We're
trying to really do work that says, what can we really see? We're working on emotion categories, we're working on color categories, all sorts of words. I mean, I'm a word researcher. I really like words, which is why I'm really delighted to land in this moment with you all today, because I don't usually get asked about this aspect of my research. It's kind of the nerdy part. It doesn't sell well, right? What does the word mean? Hardly anyone ever calls me up for a podcast and wants to talk about my favorite part of my research. And you guys come along and say, hey, let's talk about words and their meanings and categories and their meanings. I'm like, brilliant. Because that's actually a key part of what I do. And I think it really is important to interrogate everything we see relating to a word, understand what it means, as best we can, and then start understanding their own categories, indigenous ontologies that come up within the language.
Indigenous ontologies. I got you. And so it's safe to say that, Garfield, you didn't even give a proper introduction, Garfield. What are you?
I'm waiting for you guys to go to the video. Official.
All right. Okay, hold on. Let's play. Let's go. Let's finish it off. See what he has to say.
All right. and there is no grammatical suffix that will make us think that this is one related to that which is black. That will be a different term entirely. That's a cool argument too, Asar. More than the people become binary when they make man out of mud. But I can't make that hypothesis work from everything I've seen in the philology. But I'm not mad at that. Now, yeah, this is a black herd of people. It literally is. And the grammar of the ancient Egyptians let us know this is exactly what they're saying. So these three strokes here don't necessarily indicate plurality in the way that they indicate a collective. See, for instance, do you think they indicate is 3 bulls or more than 3 bulls? This is just a herd. That's one thing. You see what I mean? So if this means Egyptian, social, then what does this mean? You have to be consistent even in your refudiations. Let's suppose you're extracting Egyptian out of this. There got to be some grammatical logic to it. No, see, I think you're making a mistake and confusing this for a term with a TU bird suffixed on it. This is not the people of that which is, because in order to inject of that which is, we need a TU bird. That is Kemet to you.
Did you want to add something?
Well, I mean, it's very interesting, and he's not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It is very common. I mean, he knows the grammar.
Absolutely.
So it is true that the nisba, which is also a term we have in for Arabic to refer to that which is, it changes a word class. It is often written with this tu bird or teal bird.
Mm-hmm.
From what I know though about the way that people from the Black Land is written, that it is commonly written like this. I'm not sure why that is. I mean, but this is an alternate. What my rejoinder would be, I think this is a legitimate alternate spelling, and yeah, I'd have to go into the corpus and have a good look. But from what I know, I think this is an yeah. I think this is an alternate spelling because I can see it used for people living in Egypt. And like I said before, if that's not what people living in the Nile Valley, to be really clear, right? People living in the Black Land. From what I know, this is really the spelling. He's right that the spelling can look different to refer to those of, but I think this is actually a perfectly legitimate spelling.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but, I can't. I don't want to also just be so, no, this is wrong.
No, of course not. Of course
it's wrong. There's a real logic that he's bringing into this. I really get it. It's just, like I said, I think it is taking kind of a cultural paradigm that doesn't exist in the culture. That's really, yeah, that's really my issue with it, I guess.
And you would translate that as what? Just Egyptian?
The people in the Nile Valley.
Right.
The people in the Nile Valley, yeah, because that's where you get this whole Kemet from, right? Because the Nile Valley is the black part. It's not the whole of Egypt, including all the deserts. It's referring really to those people living inside the cultivated area.
Okay.
Let's see what he finished saying.
There's no TU here. Just like this right here. Social was good. His answer was good, but that was for another inquiry. This isn't Kemet TU. This is Kemet. And we all agree that this is a black herd of cattle. When we change the idiom with the determinatives here, we don't want to say that this is black people. How come?
See,
I don't know.
Yeah, that's me in the chat. He argued, going back and forth.
The problem is we just don't have that. We don't have that many cases of this word being used to refer to Egyptians either. Like you often have like people of the beloved land, which happens a lot as well. So, but this is definitely a writing for the plural. I can't actually see in if I look at the corpus, what he has here, this is the right spelling, and there aren't other writings with the teal bird. So, yeah, it's tough.
You have to see the context.
Yeah, I think in context we have to understand it. But it's always it's clearly like writing to if you look in at, in the context, it's talking about like a ship full of people from Kemet, or what else? You were going to stand before the Kemetiu. You're going to stand before the people living in the Nile Valley. It would be hard to understand what that means. You would stand before the black people. Why? It would really be implying a lot about how the Egyptians frame their own population, and it would mean that they are talking about a very specific part of the population. That's what I'm saying from a cultural perspective. I understand what he's saying from a sort of grammatical spelling perspective, that there are other ways that you could have written this, but yeah, I don't really see, based on the text that I have at my disposal, to agree with his reading.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So that's it. Yeah. So we can stop that right there.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. So that was interesting. So yeah, this is a conversation we'll be having back and forth. So
Yeah.
I just felt like, well, let's just, actually, be forthright and coming, because actually the only dog I have in the fight is to gain understanding from ancient cultures. Simple as that. And I feel like the more we understand about ancient cultures, the more we understand how these people lived and what their vibe was, what are their cultural nuances, the better off we can be. I always feel like just placing our thing on them doesn't actually help us grow. So, but that's why I wanted to, just put that up there. And Garfield, you probably should have sent it to her earlier so she could really went over some extra text, and maybe we can get back to it where you can really dig in.
We're building a relationship, we from and
I did my best with what I have, I'm afraid.
Yeah, because I would like, if at all possible, maybe you could dig into some more text to actually see, because I never want to, I never want to put I'm not downgrading what the brother's saying, right? I'm just simply saying, based off of me looking at stuff, and I can't read the glyphs, right? But based off of me reading literature, I spent a lot of money on literature, reading it, having conversations with experts, and I just want to be sure. I don't want to be the one charged with promoting false information. That's really where I'm standing at. I'd rather have the truth and move on with it.
That's right. Look, and I think in translation, there's a lot of space for plural interpretations. I do need to say that. I'm a translator.
Okay.
Right? So what I do in my job and what I help students do, is to learn how to translate. And a lot of times in my classes, I teach glyphs. If you want to learn glyphs, hit me up. It is to say, you may have something different to what I have, And I want you to feel empowered to give me what you have so that we can adjudicate whether that makes sense. Because if what you have makes sense, I'll give you the marks, whether it is like my answer or not.
Okay.
Right? It's an ancient language. There are things we don't know about the grammar. Like I told you, there are a lot of things we don't know about the sound, right? So if given that degree of the not knowable, unknowable, we have to stay very, very open-minded and say, yeah, plural interpretations are absolutely okay. So how he wants to read it, I don't want to say no, impossible. I just want to say, look, from what I can see, based on the context, I would prefer a slightly different reading. But these plural readings can exist together. Every translation of an ancient text goes in a slightly different direction.
Mm-hmm. And so it's almost like when they first deciphered the Meta Nature. Once they got through the decipherment process, and I'm asking you, the hardest thing to actually do is to put it in this proper cultural context.
Yeah.
Am I right or wrong on that?
Absolutely. So I think there's this idea in scholarship called sort of the hermeneutic circle. Yeah, this idea that you start with a theory, then you find evidence, and then you test the theory, and you come up with new ideas. Yeah, and then you find new evidence, and you have to test that new theory that you've just made. New evidence creates a new theory, and we go in this cyclical way through scholarship. That's why scholarship continues to endure, because if not, we'd say, oh, well, we know the answer to that. We're not going to do that anymore. That happens very rarely, in fact. And so as more texts come to light and we learn more things about word meanings or grammar, we have to be open to, being wrong and saying, okay, no, it's actually something different. We enter a new cycle. So I think that's standard. Since decipherment, we have always been learning more about the texts. It's a never-ending cycle.
Absolutely.
All right, let's pause. Let's pause for a second. Peace and love, everybody. This is the Brother Garfield podcast. Today we have some special guests that we're going to interview. A well-esteemed Egyptologist, well-qualified. I'm going to introduce her in a minute, but before I do, let me bring on my partner, Mr. Brother Anhk West, aka the God Killer, and let me also bring on Soso, another pseudo killer. How you guys doing today?
Yeah, peace, man. Yeah, man. It's gonna be a great show, man. I'm excited.
All right. Let me bring on, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Camilla DiBiase Dyson. I butcher it because I'm good with names now. All right. So this is Dr. Camille DiBiase Dyson. She's a senior lecturer at the Department of History and Archaeology at Macquarie University. All right.
Yeah,
Did I say it right? Okay. So she's a Sydney-sider with a passion for ancient Egypt since childhood. And she has a PhD degrees in ancient history from Macquarie University. She moved to Berlin to conduct postdoctoral research in Egyptology and linguistics, first as a fellow for the Excellence Cluster TAPI, the formation and transformation of space and knowledge in ancient civilizations, and then with the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, 2010 to 12. Following this, she was a junior professor for Egyptology at the George August University in Göttingen, Germany, then a research fellow at the University of Vienna. But at the end of the day, she's just a wonderful individual who knows a lot about ancient Egypt. That's the bottom line. How are you doing today again?
It's so lovely to see you all and to meet you all. Thank you.
Before we start anything, I get into anything, right? Let me ask you this. What made you get it? This is going to be flashback like 2 million years ago, but why did you get into Egyptology? What made you like it?
It's hard to tell. I mean, I knew I was in it before I'd even started. I was about 12, I think, and I knew I wanted to study ancient cultures. I studied quite a few different ancient cultures at the time, just through little courses that got sent in the mail. I don't know if you guys as children ever had these kind of offers. I don't know whether the people were specialists, but I just love these little deep dives into ancient cultures. I read as much as I could as a child, and I don't know. Egypt for me has an enduring fascination. It is a culture of extraordinary antiquity, and yet it's so interested in the future. it's so interested in its own posterity, in keeping its own culture alive and vivid for humanity forever. And I find that enduringly fascinating. And I think they would have loved how much we talk about them today. I think that would have been exactly what they wanted.
I think so too. Let me ask you this. So while you were growing up as a teenager, did your parents in any way influence you or say go in this direction or go in that direction? Or were they totally surprised with you getting into Egyptology?
I think they were more surprised, but they're linguists. So they're people who are also really interested in language. And I wanted to actually be different from them when I was a child and teen, and even in my 20s. I said, I'm going to be an archaeologist, more like a scientist. But actually, at the end of the day, it was the language that kept me coming back. Now I do a bit of both, but still my heart beats for the beautiful language.
I noticed one of the things that you're into is in moving towards the future is, I think, digitizing certain things as far as translating text through AI, and I'm fascinated with that. I love the AI stuff. When you don't have to do it yourself, you love it. So with AI, it seems like that's a new wave. I see a couple of years ago, like a year and a half ago, the Sumerian text, they had some text over on that side of the world where they use AI to transliterate it and all that stuff. But what's going on? What are you doing? It seems like you're going to be a hero for Egyptology and the amateurs, because now you're pushing this AI stuff. It sounds fascinating.
So I'm not working at the forefront of it right now. I have to. That's a big disclaimer. What I was doing was that we had a master student conducting a project on testing one of the tools that was purportedly supposed to transliterate and translate Egyptian texts, and her thesis really investigated that, and then we also wrote about it, which was really great, and talked to Google about it. It was a Google translator. There are quite a few on the market right now. They're built on different data, so they actually work in different ways. And what I would say, just to sum it up, is machines can at the moment transliterate quite well. It's making the jump from transliterating the text, so actually representing the sounds, into translation that machines are still finding hard. So my prognosis is it's going to take a few more years. It will probably happen, but they need a lot more data, and a lot more data that is well annotated in order to train the machines to really move into translation in a big way.
All right, beautiful, beautiful. Solsa, do you have a question for the Egyptologist, Dr. Camilla, at this point?
No. Let's go ahead and get it started.
All right, cool. All right, look at Brother Anhk in. Brother Anhk, do you have a question?
Man, Dr. Dyson, we was already on fire though. I got a whole class. That was deep. That whole explanation in the cultural context, and that was deep. That was good. You basically answered my questions. But so your expertise in Egyptology is exactly what though? What is it exactly that you do?
That's a good question.
Yes.
What am I trained to do? I'm trained in archaeology, in art history, and in language. So, general Egyptological education comprises all three. I think, we're reaching more and more out into other disciplines now, more into sort of not just language for its own sake, but also linguistics, not just culture for its own sake, but also anthropology. Not just art history for its just within Egyptology, but understanding it within the broader context of art history. I think Egyptologists are finally coming to a space where we're seeing that our culture has a lot to give to bigger discussions about language, about culture, about artistic form. And I think it's a really nice moment to be in, because I think instead of constantly borrowing from other disciplines, an area study like Egyptology has to also give back. What does our language, this is language that we are purported experts of, what can we give back? What can we tell about this language?
It's a beautiful language. It is.
Yeah. Is there something within Egyptology that fascinated you when you joined? Like, were you ever interested in like the biblical stories, or you really didn't really care much about that?
I was when I was little. When I really started getting into it, I was also interested in that whole Mesopotamian region, the whole ancient Near East, and in fact, Egypt sort of then became my main focus. I remember a moment of really falling in love with Egypt was in high school when we were reading in translation, obviously not in Egyptian. What I now know as a text specialist as being papyrus lancing, which is a text in which a scribe is telling his junior scribe, a student scribe, that being a scribe is the best thing ever. You don't want to be any other profession. Everything else sucks. And he was going through all these other different professions and saying how terrible they are and really making fun of his student. And I realized this is a culture with a really, really well-developed sense of humor. And I felt like, how is that even possible that 3,500 years ago, people could be so funny and that we would still find them funny 3,500 years later? And I feel like humor is something that just connects us across cultures, across space and time. I just edited a beautiful little story on a tiny little piece of a little writing board, like a little Etch-a-Sketch from antiquity, which tells this hilariously funny story. I can tell you if you want, but otherwise I can also talk about something else. But to translate a text that is quite clearly intended to be funny and to try to also bring that humor across is also a really interesting exercise. But that I think that's it. It's the humanity of the language and of the text that keeps me interested.
As far as you want to go, Anhk? You got a question?
Yeah, I want to talk about as far as when you're translating as a translator. You spoke of how there's some flexibility in it. So what is to stop the translator from just going off the rails? We knew the early Greeks, before it was deciphered, they was looking at the picture and was thinking it was about the pictures. They didn't realize that it was actually sound correspondence. Right. They did all these mistakes, right? So as a translator, how much liberty are you allowed to have? I know you say, well, you don't say you're wrong, but can the rubber actually meet the road when your translation just doesn't make sense based off of the time period, based off of the culture, based off of what we have and the understanding of what we have?
Absolutely. Yeah, so this is such a good question. And you're absolutely right that the decipherment history in the West was quite long and drawn out. It's interesting that actually the medieval Iraqis, Syrian scholars actually knew a lot more about glyphs than the Westerners of the same period. And even into the 17th century, there was a lot more knowledge preserved. But in the West, it took them a very long time. They saw everything as a symbol, and it was, clearly took a whole team of scholars to show that wasn't the case. But I want to give an example that constantly interests me. It's in the medical text, which I know that you guys are also interested in. You said to me that that was an area you were interested in, so I'll try and draw an example from that. The medical texts are one of the hardest corpora to translate. Because they are, in effect, a closed corpus, right? They have a whole series of different words for investigating a patient and for treating a patient, the kinds of cuts you need to make, kind of implements you need, and a wild and diverse array of ingredients that you can mix to make concoctions, applications, balms, and so on to treat a patient. Now, the problem is, because this corpus just kind of is, we just have a handful from the Pharaonic period, there are a heap of ingredients that we may never know the actual translation for. And likewise, there are a whole series of diseases or symptoms of diseases for which we may never have a translation. And sometimes that's because the Egyptians don't want to explain it to you. Sometimes, for instance, they might think a disease like the Nesit, which seems to kind of come out, it's like an illness that sort of comes out in a mad rash on your body. They thought it was created by a demon, a spirit of some kind. So they don't care. They're not trying to think about the etiology of the disease. They know the etiology. It's a spirit. It's come into your body and it needs to be exorcised, right? So we can't translate it. We have to just call it Nesit, or there are others like this. There are quite a few sort of, especially rash-based things that we're never going to be able to really translate. And for the ingredients, the same goes. My students and I puzzling for weeks. Is this actually, this here's a afif. Is it actually fly poo, or Does it just look like fly poo? So it's some kind of little black crystalline structure that they thought kind of looks like it. Is like a mouse's tail actually a mouse's tail, or is it like a plant that has like a little curly tendril? So this is a problem that we have in a lot of cultures. It's just in Egypt, like everywhere else. You don't always have direct access to a lot of things. And how people then translate it can, as you said, go off the rails. So there are cases in which, claims are made about symptoms, for instance, that, this is absolutely this very specific illness that, Westerners have found. But how do we know that the Egyptians really meant that? Or they used opiates. Well, do you know if this is actually, do you know which plant it is, and have you tested it pharmaceutically? There are some scholars like Tanya Pomeranian, for instance, in Germany, who has actually tested some ingredients in order to see their phytochemical properties, for instance. So there is research being done to get further and further and further into this knowledge. But like I said, you actually have to have a stable translation for the word, know the plant that it is, in order to carry out that research. So some may never have that degree of we may never gain that degree of insight on all of the ingredients. So does that give an example to sort of show you like how far you can go? When they say, oh, the Egyptians did this, the Egyptians did it. Wait, are you reading a translation?
Right.
And if so, which one? Because some translators of medical texts westernize all the illnesses and ingredients, and others do not. And I say this as someone who has translated a medical text, so with my students. So we had to understand what is the best practice here. And in fact, often we will just leave things untranslated. And one way to do it is, for instance, to say like, use the Egyptian word and then have a hyphen and then say plant or mineral after it that is coming from the classifier. So because classifiers, you have the plant sign, the M2, it's like a little bunch of flowers, or you have a little circles for the minerals, or you have a piece of flesh or a hide for an animal product. At least from the classifier, you have a broad category for the ingredient, and you can sort of add that as a compound for the word, right? So a blah, blah animal or a blah, blah mineral will help, I think, the reader at least understand what sort of general vicinity of meaning they're in. But that can make it hard.
Okay.
Yeah, can I ask, like, what are the hot button topics that you have in the field that stresses you out, that even you're like,
You mean like ones that I am interested in, or ones that I feel like are getting too much attention?
Both. Let's give both. One you're interested in and one you feel like get too much attention.
Yeah. Well, what do I feel is getting too much attention? I feel like Egyptology sort of works in very weird cycles of some periods getting a lot of attention for a long time, and then people think of them as being kind of, oh, everyone's done that now, so now we're going to move on to a new period. So sometimes I feel like everyone's attention is in a different place. I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong. I just think it has to do with the fashion. I was remarking to a friend of mine that the Middle Kingdom was really having a moment. I don't like a lot of scholars now are sort of flocking to that period because it's being less investigated. And I think that's actually a good thing, but it means that then attention is being taken away from other periods. It sort of creates sometimes a bit of a disbalance. But like I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing for scholarship. What really interests me at the moment is the way that Egyptology is trying to right its wrongs in some way.
Okay.
Like it is trying to kind of, for instance, one of the main evils of Egyptology was that it denied access to antiquities by Egyptian Egyptologists through the 19th and early 20th century, denied access. So it did not give concessions to Egyptian archaeologists, despite the fact they were well trained. And it did not acknowledge its incredible archaeological know-how. So you had archaeological experts from Egypt working in the field that were never credited in volumes. And there is a lot of work being done to give Indigenous archaeologists from Egypt their their voice.
Okay.
And I think that is incredibly important work being done, because we did them a great disservice, and we have taken away their finds from them. So I think there's some very important work being done there. It's not being done by me, but I really honor the people who are doing that work. Where I'm personally interested, as in where I have skin in the game and am invested in what's happening in Egyptology, is this movement also, like I was mentioning earlier, of trying to get closer to indigenous categories of knowledge and understand what Egyptians mean by certain words. I think we are really having a moment now where we're saying, okay, don't look at the translation for a minute. Try and really understand what they're trying to say. Understand how the texts are working. And I think getting that's also doing some really important stuff for how we talk about consciousness and the mind and categories. So I find that personally very, very stimulating.
Yeah, that's deep. It's almost like trying to rewrite the wrongs. And like I think that's important. So then, as a novice, right? As an African American novice, I want to put emphasis on African American for a reason, right? Early Egyptologists was Reisner, and then they were very, very racist. They had racialized ideas.
Yeah.
And the way they looked at it in this Middle Eastern context, like the rating race theory and all this nonsense. And they kind of left out the African context of it. Now, you spoke of how the river and the people range from all the way from the Middle East all the way down to the Sudan. But they seem to put emphasis on like the Middle Eastern studies, right? And they wasn't putting emphasis on the African context. So my question to you is, where is the field at right now in pushing towards equilibrium and giving us a understanding that we can actually trust?
That's a wonderful question. My goodness. Okay. So the recentering of Egypt towards the recentering, i.e., not poling it to north or south, but bringing it back into its context as an African country, was work that was really started in a key way by a number of Marxist and Black scholars in the 70s. So this is, I think, a 50-year-old discussion that is now really coming to being. So if you think of like Sheikh Anta Diop and Molete Hefestate, like, do you know? You probably know some of these scholars.
Absolutely, positively,
Yeah, right.
absolutely.
Yeah,
we got all the books. What are you saying?
So they're really, even, I mean, whether they qualify as Egyptologists, sometimes I think they use the evidence in ways that that weren't perhaps aligned to where the scholarship was at, because what their game was actually far bigger and far more powerful, which is Egypt in general requires recentering. So the idea of, all pharaohs were Black. There were certainly pharaohs from Nubia. The whole 25th dynasty was a series of Nubian pharaohs. So nobody's denying that, but they were then trying to kind of shoehorn that into all of Egyptian history was like that. And it's like, well, take it easy. Let's just try and understand everything in context. I think what the important message was is that Egypt is an African country too. And it saw itself as a country within its own context. It didn't see itself as African. There wasn't a sense of Africa, right? But there was a sense of Egypt being at a major crossroads always. They had all of sort of the Sinai to the north, and then the eastern Mediterranean. They had Arabia to its direct east across the Red Sea, Libya on the other side, which had a whole series of sort of Bedouin tribes that sometimes tried to encroach on Egypt, and to the south also the Sudan. And so it has to be viewed in this real the context in which it is. And I think that work is now really being done. I think there's a lot more emphasis now, for instance, on studies of the Nile. So the idea of the connectedness of, the whole Nile Valley. There's also, ideas of understanding Egyptian nomadism. Some of my colleagues are really interested in that. So you're looking at nomads who are traversing terrain that stretches from the Sudan into Egypt. And so this idea about borders and clear ethnic identity sort of falls away. Really understanding it in its context as a crossroads. And I think that's the important place to come to. I think you have this Pan-African sort of Renaissance, with this upsurge in the 70s that forces Egyptology finally to say, can you please pay attention? And then over the years, the 80s and 90s, you get these, you get works that, are more anthropologically focused, more focused on Egypt also as an African country. So I think we're in a good place now where we're also transcending that and really just seeing the interconnectedness of the whole.
So see, that was a very informative answer. And I got the books. I don't know if you can see it. Can you see that? Can you see that, Garfield?
I can't see anybody
you can't
right
see
now.
it, Garfield. Where you at, Garfield? Yeah. See, listen.
Yeah.
I've been reading Shigandi Diop's works, right?
Yeah.
And it's amazing how you reached that conclusion. I reached that conclusion. You can actually find. I took my son to the Met. You can actually find Diops in the Met. And the way you explained it, people always say, yeah, well, Diops blew them away, did this. I was like, no, Diops actually forced people to bring Africa into its, Egypt into the African context. And like you said, then they like oversteered, right?
Yeah.
Hold on, bring it back a little bit, right? And the way you explain it, it comes all together. So now we can truly understand what Egypt is. Full blown, the African country, right?
Yeah.
Diverse population, ranging in skin color.
Yeah.
Like the way you said that was very educational.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I studied this sort of Pan-African movement. I'm very grateful to my lecturers at Macquarie University, because I studied where I now work. And I had to write an essay on that movement. And I absolutely loved it. It gave me a completely new understanding of where Egyptology had to get to. Yeah.
That was deep. Yeah. They appreciate you for that.
Hey, so you got a question, brother?
Yeah. So are we going to the language still? Or are we?
You could go ahead. You could go ahead.
Again, we did it.
I've got like 3 more minutes. I have to then go.
Yeah. So just to get back on some of the other stuff we was talking about, right? I think like in the 18th dynasty, you start seeing maybe like Nubian viceroys in Egypt, and they start carrying the particular name, whether it's Meru Hepra, you know what I'm saying? And you start
quite a few guys.
Right. So what is when we also see wretched Kush. Right. So how do you make sense out of the wretched Kush, but then you also see them in positions of the aristocracy? So how do we make sense of that relationship?
Yeah, and I think this is really a key part of distinguishing state ideology from the realpolitik, the real life of people. Yeah. So for Egyptian ideology, the idea of the pharaoh as the head of the Egyptian, or the black land, the red land, so the whole beloved land, the Tameri, that whole idea is that he will maintain ma'at, he will maintain justice, he will conduct ritual, and thereby also maintaining ma'at, and he will extend the borders. Yeah. So this is part of his cosmic duty as a monarch. In order for that paradigm to work, everybody around you has to be an enemy. Does that make sense? So you need the borders to be hostile in order for the paradigm of you conquering those borders to work. So it's not just Kush that's Hesi, that's wretched, as you say. It's also the Asiatics that are wretched. It's the Libyans that are wretched. Everyone's wretched. They have to be, by definition, in order for Egypt to say, I conquered the whole world. Okay. And of course, in real terms, very little of that's true. In fact, one of my dear friends and colleagues really even wants to question the idea of Egypt having a colony or an empire in Nubia at all. We've certainly proved long ago that they didn't have a colony to the north in the Eastern Mediterranean, but now we're actually really even questioning the extent to which they had complete control over Nubia. in the 18th dynasty, the time in which you see massive amounts of wealth coming in. So what Egypt had certainly managed to do was establish a very beneficial for them trade relationship with Nubia. That it isn't to say that Nubia didn't have its own aristocracy, as you say, they absolutely did. And it also didn't mean that Egypt didn't welcome children of the aristocracy into the so-called cup from Nubia to be with Egyptian royal children. They did. You're right. They absolutely did. But Egypt did have its own viceroys that they sent down in order to secure the gold reserves. So Egypt had a huge stake in maintaining gold reserves in Nubia. And the other thing they wanted to do was have, build temples that showed that they had a degree of control. But we don't actually have a lot more than that. So Egypt certainly had some kind of upper hand in an economic sense in maintaining its own gold reserves, which it did throughout the Nubian Nile Valley and into the deserts. But it did not necessarily conquer them in any clear way. And so I think we do have sort of a negotiated relationship, which was in some way beneficial for both parties, because we have Nubian ceramics right through the 18th dynasty, some taking on Egyptian forms because there was cultural contact, but not necessarily kind of caving into Egyptian hegemony or something like that. We don't necessarily have clear evidence for that. We certainly have in the 18th dynasty an enhanced attention to gold reserves, because that was of their own and within Nubia, because that was securing their position as a great power within the region.
Okay.
That's a really good question.
So, you want to jump in, Garfield? Because I'm there. I'm in the pocket.
Go ahead. I have Dr. Camilla's email. I could call her, text her.
I'm in the pocket.
Good.
Okay, so in Egyptology, there seems to be a debate going on. Okay, now I'm not certain if the debate. Now I'm talking about the KMT. Okay, now I'm not sure. Are you familiar with the idea that Kemet may only be the areas, the floodplain areas where this black soil is more vibrant, as opposed to it being everything? Are you familiar with that?
That's right. So that's the idea of it being just the Nile Valley. The Kemet refers to the Nile Valley and not to the whole territory. Yes.
Correct. And maybe in the Delta too, where you see the black soil too, maybe. It's a few stories. Okay. So is that kind of like is that kind of like a debate on that? Should we apply to the whole thing or
I don't think it's a debate. I think we have for the whole land, we have the word Tameri, the beloved land.
Okay, Tameri. Okay.
We have other terminology that can more easily refer to the whole land. I'm not saying that Kemet is not used necessarily to refer to all of Egypt, but when it does so, it's a metonymy. It is it's a word for a part referring to the whole. Just like in the papers when we talk about the United States, we often say Washington, right? Yeah. We say Washington, we say the White House.
Yes.
And we're actually referring to the United States of America and its this government. So we use metonymies all the time to talk about places and in all languages, to the best of my knowledge. And so the idea that you would refer to Tameri to sometimes refer very specifically to what you're referring to, i.e. the Nile Valley, and sometimes to refer to kind of in a part for whole metonymy, Egypt. I do not see a problem with that any more than I see a problem with saying the White House for the United States.
Okay. So since you're familiar with the work of Diop, or at least read some of the arguments, right? He made this statement that Kim actually means the black people. And so has that particular situation been worked out, or is that still a debate? Is that a debate that Kemet could just mean the black people, or as we talked about, the black land or people of the black land? What is that a debate to you? Have you heard of it? What is that?
So it wasn't really I wasn't really awake to it in the way I have now been since you showed me the video. I wasn't aware that there's kind of a set of African American Egyptologists that are unpacking this, and I'm actually really fascinated by the discussion. As we've kind of discussed elsewhere, I do feel like the textual evidence leads us more towards seeing the word as meaning those living within the Black Land.
Okay.
So I just think when you look at the text in context, it's more likely to mean that. And I do think that it has to do with the fact that Egypt, in general, Egyptian texts do not describe skin color of people. So I just feel like there isn't really a lot of evidence for that, and therefore I feel like the theory, I'm not 100% convinced by it as yet. That's not to say that I never will be. It just means that I don't see evidence for it at present.
Yeah, I get that. So okay. So I guess I don't know, Sosa. So I think I mean, you know, I guess it's just certain ideas you know, that they want to be promoted by the, you know, by the community. And maybe that's the fact that we're novice and there's some things that we're not privy to, maybe. We're not privy to everything, or maybe not.
Well, look, it really, I guess, I think it's about novice versus professional, but I think it is sort of access to text. I mean, because of course, again, we come back to the idea of how do you do word research? How do you understand what words mean? Well, you only understand words in context, right? Mm-hmm. We only understand what it means in a sentence. And right. So
okay, in order to like in those particular glyphs, right? Like, yeah. I think because sometimes you struggle because you say, well, I see that it says this, but until you see it in a sentence,
yeah,
it's really hard for you to get the context of what's being said. So just seeing it individually is kind of like, okay.
Exactly.
Right, okay.
Exactly. So where I guess I feel like there might be a disconnect is, are you guys having access to all the texts? And, you know, it's not necessarily the knowledge of the language, but it could also be that, like being able to read the text in the original gets you even closer. But even just at the level of translation, having access to all of the requisite text in translation to see how the word works in context, I think that's really the difference. It's not the fact that I've studied longer than you have. It's because I've got a German database that I can read German. That helps. But, you know, of texts that are prepared for me that I can have a look at and say, well, you know, I can't see what you are telling me. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but that's what I have at my fingertips. So I think that's the distinction. And I'm very happy always to facilitate that access. I teach my students, for instance, how to use translation software, you know, like Google Translate or DeepL, to just copy and paste text from German databases, because the Germans have most of the text, the big text databases. So if you want to find text, right, there are ways to do it. We have to teach our students how to do it because they don't speak a lot of foreign languages. Okay. And give them that access to all of this wonderful information, because it's there, but it has to be somehow made accessible. It's free, right? I can give you an URL, but it's about also being shown how to access that stuff.
Yeah, so that the Kemet thing is an interesting conversation, because what people will normally use against you is that they say, but wait a minute, there's no direct evidence that the word Kemet means the Black Land. So what would be your response to having no direct evidence? Are there any other ways to figure this out? What would you say as a person that you know reads the language in the glyphs?
I would say define direct evidence. So
an Egyptian reading, I don't know.
No, what I mean by that is, so how much would it take for people to be convinced, I guess, is what would be the threshold, because Egyptian texts do talk about the Black Land in relation to the Red Land. So as far as I'm concerned, I do see for myself what I would call direct evidence, in which the Black Land is in opposition to the Red Land. I see there being dualism, a dichotomy of the two concepts, showing that the landscape is seen by the Egyptians just like now as being between the fertile and the arid, between the habited and the inhabited. And I think there is you know enough in the text to show us that they are aware of this. And so for me, that constitutes direct evidence for me. That doesn't necessarily constitute direct evidence for other scholars. So I guess I'm really representing myself here, of course.
Okay. All right. Like that. So
let me ask you this. Is there are y'all pretty confident with the colors and the symbolic meaning in terms of what red meant, what yellow meant, what
You just fell into my.
Yeah, you missed it earlier. So yeah, that's what she's working on. Let's go. This is what we need.
All right.
That's what we
And
need.
the answer is yeah, no, I'm working on this and I'm loving it. And I do have to go in 10 minutes, so don't let me carry on. But what I want to say is I'm going to present on I'm going to flying to this, Canada and the States in a couple of weeks. I'm going to be presenting at a conference, and what I'm going to be talking about is I don't think red means red the way you think red means red, and I think the Egyptian concept of red, and there is some earlier scholarship that does this, but the Egyptian concept of red is actually a broader idea of a really highly saturated color, like one with a lot of pigment in it and not a lot of gray. So a lot of yellows and reds and bright. The sun, for instance, is red. What does that mean? Unless the sun's setting, the sun doesn't look red, right?
Right.
So why do they call, the sun is red and a flamingo is red? And in fact, the word red comes from the word flamingo. Flamingos aren't red, they're pink, right? Okay. So Egyptians' idea of red is slightly different. This comes back to my obsession with categories, right? It's about define red, right? And what my paper is about is also about emotion and color. So seeing red or being in a black mood, that's stuff I'm working on. Okay. And it's but so what Kemet means is not just black, it's kind of dark. It doesn't have light. So it's not, again, it's not the same necessarily as black. And also black land, what does that mean? It's not black in color, right? Fertile land is very dark brown. Mm-hmm. Right. It's very dark. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily black. So it is about understanding that color categories, we're going to talk about color, we're going to talk about categories in different cultures. It's important to come at it and say, okay, what does the word mean first? And how does that, change our appreciation of what we're looking at when we read the language? So you can translate it as red if you like, but you might not be very accurate when you do it. You might translate that as black if you like, but you might not be very accurate when you do.
We need that paper. We wait on that paper. Hey, so we wait on that. Where's that paper?
It's all up here.
We don't even know what the color. That was a good question. Man, we got to get the color right first. Man. Go ahead, Sosa.
Yeah. So like I said, I appreciate the dialogue that we have right now. And so you have touched on a little bit of the Nubian and the Egyptian connection. So now what about the opposite direction in terms of coming from the Levant? How was that relationship? When in terms of sharing and borrowing, or was it not, or was it very much?
I think it was very similar in many ways. I think with your nearest neighbors, there is always a degree of cultural blending. And we can see that cultural blending with the Levant very, very early. So there's, we have these beautiful knife handles, like there's one in Brooklyn that's absolutely incredible. These beautiful early knife handles made in ivory that have been carved with teeny tiny little animals and just wild. And they look very much like ones that you find in Uruk or, they're so in
stone knives.
Sorry?
You talking about the stone knives, the rack knife? I think I said that wrong.
Gebel al-Arq. That's right, the Gebel al-Arq knife. Oh my God, you know it. Okay. So I'm going to go to Brooklyn. So you get this these amazing connections across quite a big spatial distance in a very early period. Just like we see kind of, a blending between Egyptian and Nubian ceramics also from, late prehistoric into the early historic period. So I think the connections then grow over time. As I hate the word civilization, as cultures become more codified and they establish bigger administrative structures, of course, these relationships get formalized in weird ways. You get people becoming, like viceroys of Kush, for instance. You get these kinds of things for Nubia, for the Levant. You also get sort of the overseer of the foreign lands to the north. Overseer of the northern foreign lands. You get a lot of people calling themselves messengers, translators, heralds. So people are moving across the Levant a lot. They're moving there. They're not necessarily settling there, but they're moving through that space. They're carrying messages from the Egyptian court. They're in army barracks there. Supporting Egyptian campaigns to secure their own, economic interests, and a lot of the time they needed to be translators. So of course, then there's a bleeding of the languages into each other. Egypt starts to take on Semitic loanwords with a higher frequency. So they are definitely being impacted by their neighbors to the north in very clear ways, and that changes over time. With the material record that we have and the written record that we have. But by the Ramesside period, time, Ramesses the Great, and later, you can really see the way that the language has had an impact, just like German has been impacted by English, for instance, which I heard a lot, in Germany. It's like, oh, wow, lots more English words now. Okay. It's gathering in cultural currency. So it's clearly cool in Ramesside Egypt to have some cool, like, Semitic slang. That was, it does seem to have been kind of to do.
So within Egypt, right? Because it covers a large territory. You have upper and lower. So then just think modern day, you have North Carolina and South Carolina. Was it a smooth, harmonious connection up and lower, or were there even issues just upper to lower?
There were definitely issues up to lower, actually, because you get Egypt sort of descending into sort of civil war every couple of 100 years. Where you get smaller princes breaking away from the crown. So that's not all. The break doesn't always fall in the same fracture line, if you know what I mean. So sometimes it's more kind of like the fracture line falls higher, like in Middle Egypt, like the first intermediate period, and the fracture line falls lower in the second intermediate period when the Hyksos came into the north part of Egypt from the Levant. And the princes of Thebes were the ones who were kicking up a fuss and trying to move north. And they had some allies also in the center of Egypt, but they also had enemies there, right? Because again, civil war. I mean, you guys from your own history know civil war is very, very damaging for a country and breaks it apart in pieces. And Egypt certainly saw that as well. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So you deal more specifically with the language is your specificity.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So have y'all are there some like new discoveries that y'all found that you're anxious to get to or that's come up recently?
Well, you didn't like my black is not black one?
I came late. I think I missed the black. The color one. Oh yeah. That's pretty dope. No, you could be talking about black, and then you look at it, and be like, "Hold on, that's not my concept of black." I thought that's pretty.
No, I'm just being very cheeky. Yeah, I mean, what are some other new discoveries? I mean, I've got an incredible.
Have you been to Egypt though? You've been there?
We are in Egypt. Yeah, we have an excavation there. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, we're just studying the material at the moment. We're not digging up anything new. Okay. I have to also go soon. I have to go because I've got another appointment.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Before you go though, I have 100 more questions. Are you ready?
Appreciate your time real quick.
I'm gonna email you, and we're gonna have to do this again, man. This was fun, and I think you're probably one of the most intelligent women I've ever met. Just on a serious level with this Egyptology stuff, you definitely be up there. You top 5 dead or alive, as I say about rappers. Let me ask you this before you go. You're in Australia, and what do you do for fun outside of Egyptology? Before you go, what do you do for fun? Because you must do something. Do you play badminton, tennis?
I dance.
What about your husband? Does he play cricket?
No, he's Mexicano. He doesn't play cricket.
Okay. All right, cool. All right, so I'm gonna say again, thank you for coming on. You've been a lovely guest, and you definitely helped us to understand Egypt from a different perspective. And I want to say thank you, man. I appreciate your scholarship.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate your questions. You really come at it with so much learning and so much rigor. I really appreciate that. I really like being asked genuine questions and from a place of real thought. And I really do. I like giving my time to people who are willing to engage in that kind of rigorous and open way. I really appreciate it.
All right.
And I
All right,
appreciate
thank
your honest answers too. Just for the record, I appreciate the whole situation was very good, and it will be helpful going forward for our community. Thanks a lot. Appreciate
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all. I really did.
All right. Hold 1 second. Sosa, you wanted to say anything before she leaves?
No. Just thank you for your time. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Waiting for your article. Waiting for your.
waiting for I'm gonna pass that out all over the community. Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, hold on 1